Hey guys, Hackersploit here, back again with another video. Welcome back to the Red Team series. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at exploitation techniques, or the process or the tactic of gaining initial access to the target system. In addition to that, we'll also be exploring the process of setting up a C2 server or a command and control server for our target systems, and that'll set up the stage for the rest of the tactics that we'll be highlighting throughout this particular series. Let's get started by taking a look at what exactly we will be covering in this video. So firstly, I'll take you through our exploitation scenario, because I think it'll be much better if I actually take you through an exploitation scenario from start to finish, or from start to initial access. And then we'll get started with the practical aspect of the video by taking a look at how to set up our C2 server with Empire. And then we'll move on to generating malicious documents with Luckystrike. And we'll then, of course, move on to the final stage, which will involve initial exploitation. All right, so now in terms of the Mitre attack framework and the initial access tactic, there are various techniques that you can utilize, but again, the ones that I've highlighted here are some of the most important. And of course, you may be familiar with some of them. The first one, of course, is exploiting public-facing applications. So if the company or organization has servers or web applications that are public-facing, then you can target them. But of course, I've gone through many examples of this on my channel before, so I'm going to be exploring a new technique, or a technique that I haven't highlighted before, and that is phishing. And to a certain degree, we'll also cover the process of creating a USB rubber ducky that can be used for USB dropping. And then, of course, the other technique is the supply chain compromise. So in this video, we're going to be exploring a phishing technique, or a phishing scenario, where we are going to perform or set the stage for our phishing attempt. And then, of course, we'll generate the malicious document with a macro. And again, then we'll actually take a look at how to set it up, or how to set up our payload, so on and so forth. Now, there is one thing that I want to cover, or I want to actually explain before we move on, and that is that I will not be taking you through the process of setting up a phishing server or a phishing framework like GoPhish, primarily because that is against the YouTube community guidelines, and I cannot demonstrate anything related to phishing. So I will be, of course, skipping over that step, but again, the techniques remain the same. The main objective here is to generate a malicious document that can provide us with access. Now, when we talk about the scenario, again, it's going to be fairly simple. Number one, we'll generate the malicious document with Luckystrike. We'll then, of course, use that malicious document for our email campaign, and we'll send it to our target, right? And of course, you can use this same methodology whenever you've obtained a user's email address. And of course, I'll probably make a guide on my blog that covers phishing and how you can utilize GoPhish. But once you've sent the email with the document attached, they're going to open the document, and they're going to execute the macro that contains the reverse shell payload, or the stager. And then we are going to get a ping back, or a reverse shell, on our C2 server, which again, we can utilize either Empire, Metasploit, or Armitage, depending on what you're comfortable using. Of course, there are third-party proprietary solutions like CobaltStrike, which of course requires a license or a subscription to utilize. So I wanted to focus on tools that are open source and that can easily be utilized. And of course, Empire is really well-respected and quite a beloved tool in the context of a C2 server. Right, so again, that's the essential scenario and methodology here. Then we have the infrastructure in terms of our lab, because I'm doing this on my virtual hacking lab here in my office. So we are going to require a Windows VM that has Microsoft Office installed, has Windows 7 and newer installed. So again, it needs to have Windows 7 or 8 or 10. It requires PowerShell 2.0 and newer, and you need to have Windows Defender disabled. This Windows VM is going to be used for the generation of the malicious document with Luckystrike. And we then have the Kali Linux VM, which is going to be our C2 server. Alternatively, you can also use Linode, DigitalOcean, or AWS to host your C2 server. Regardless of that, you can still follow the same instructions to install either Empire or any of the other tools that I'll be utilizing. And then, of course, the target system, the requirements are that it needs to be running Windows and it needs to have Microsoft Office installed. However, in the context of Empire and setting up stages there, you can also customize your stager based on your target's operating system. So again, if you are targeting OS X, there are stages for that as well. So you can mix and match or decide what stages you want to use instead of the ones that I'll be using. Right, that being said, I think that's pretty much it for the theoretical aspect of this video. Let's move on to the practical aspect, and I'll see you there. Alright, so the first stage in this process is going to involve setting up our infrastructure. So number one, we need to set up Empire. Now, PowerShell-empire, if you visit the GitHub repository, will tell you that it's an archived project and it's no longer supported. And again, it still works. The framework as is still works. However, if I can just open up this link here, you can see that PowerShell-empire or Kali has actually partnered with BC Security, the developers and maintainers of the project. And what that means is that they actually have the PowerShell-empire package in their repositories. And in addition to that, they also have developed a graphical user interface front end for Empire called Starkiller. And again, to install it on Kali, it's really very simple. It doesn't come pre-installed with Kali, so you need to update your repositories. And then, of course, you can install it with sudo apt-get install PowerShell-empire and Starkiller. So we are going to be utilizing PowerShell-empire and Starkiller, and we'll actually switch from one to the other. But it really is fantastic. So again, you don't have to utilize the GitHub repository. You can simply install it directly on Kali. I do believe that the PowerShell-empire and Starkiller packages are available for the Parrot OS or on their own repositories, but of course I haven't confirmed that. So let me know if those packages exist there, and you can pretty much use the same thing, or you can pretty much install it with the same commands. All right, so I'm just going to let this complete installing. Alright, so Empire and Starkiller have just been installed. The next step now that is going to be slightly different than if you had used this tool before is you need to start up the PowerShell-empire server, and then you can utilize the PowerShell client to then interact with the server. So to do that, you want to say sudo, and you do need admin privileges, and then you want to say sudo PowerShell-empire. And you then want to start up the server. So I'm going to hit sudo PowerShell-empire server, and we'll give that a few seconds to start up. There we are. It's going to set up the database, add the default user, and it's going to start loading the stages, modules, listeners, etc. So give that a few seconds. It should start up any moment now. There we are. It's going to start up it's going to again expose the API, the RESTful API on port 1337. That is, I believe that is utilized or is actually set up for Starkiller, and I'll get to that in a second. But you can see Empire server is set up now. So what we can do is, let me open up a new tab here. We can now start as well the client. So I'm going to say sudo PowerShell-empire, and we're going to start up the client. And I'll paste in my password there, and there we are. That's the familiar banner that all of you are aware of. So there it's going to connect, and there we are. So we now have access to the client, and we can say listeners, for example. Use tab completion there, and we have our listeners, etc. Right now, let's take a look at Starkiller. All right, so you can start. You can essentially search for Starkiller within the search menu here. So there we are. It should be the first one. As I said, this is a GUI front end for Empire. Now it's going to prompt you to log in. As I said, the RESTful API essentially exposed port 1337 for us. And the default username and password here are going to be Empire admin, and the password was password123, I believe. And I'm just going to log in and give that a few seconds. If all goes well, you should be welcomed to Starkiller. So the first thing you want to do is you want to head over to the sidebar here that's going to be collapsed by default, and you want to head over into your users, and you can essentially change your password for the Empire admin. I'm not going to do that because that's really not important. What we need to do now, you can take a look at your listeners, your stages, your agents, modules, credentials that you've gathered, reporting, users, and plugins. So we have an interesting plugin here. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's the csharpserver plugin, and this is for, as you can see, it tells you here, Empire csharpserver for agents. This is if you generate any executables or any stages that utilize C#. What I recommend doing is actually enabling it. So again, you want to click on status and just click on start here. That's going to start the C# server. So I'm going to start that now, and we'll give that a few seconds. It shouldn't take too long. And again, I'm just making sure that we have everything ready for the exploitation phase. There we are. It's going to say starting Empire C# server. And that's pretty much it in regards to setting up Empire and Starkiller. As I said, the front end is very well designed. You can create listeners by clicking on create here and specify the type. So you have HTTP, you have HTTP hop for proxying. You also have interpreter, redirector, etc. We'll take a look at all of those examples. But yeah, that's how to set up our C2 server with Empire, and of course how to use Starkiller. It's very, very simple. Right, the next step now is going to obviously involve the process of generating the malicious Microsoft documents or Microsoft Office documents with Luckystrike. Right, so I'm going to switch over to my Windows VM that I actually mentioned within the slides. And we can begin, setting up and configuring Luckystrike because it is a PowerShell framework. And then we can take a look at how to generate our documents. So I'll see you there. All right, so I'm now on my Windows VM, and I'm currently on the Luckystrike GitHub repository, which is also archived, but it still works really, really well. And that's why I actually wanted to take you through the process of utilizing it for the generation of malicious Office macro documents. Right, so again, if you're not familiar with Luckystrike, it's, as it says here, a PowerShell-based utility for the creation of malicious Office macro documents to be used for pen testing or educational purposes only. So again, I have to state that this is strictly educational here. There again, it gives you the requirements that I mentioned in the slides. So you require Windows 7 to Windows 10, 32-bit or 64-bit. You must be running a current version of PowerShell. You must have Microsoft Excel installed or Microsoft Office. You need to have an administrative PowerShell prompt. And yeah, the installation process is fairly simple. What you need to do is just open up PowerShell as administrator. And then you want to, I'm just going to wait for that to load up here first. I'm just going to, again, increase the font size slightly so that you guys can actually see what's going on. I'm going to navigate into my C drive here. Whoops, I typed that in correctly. There we are. And then we'll head over into users and IE user and desktop, right? So this is where we want to save Luckystrike. So I'll just clear that out, and what we need to do is simply execute this in PowerShell. So again, I'm just going to copy that, and all we need to do is just execute it, and that's going to download Luckystrike for us on our desktop. So there we are. We'll paste that in there, and I'll hit enter, and again, give that a few seconds. There we are. It's going to create it for us, and if you have any dependencies like db.sql, it's going to install that for you. It's going to prompt you to install it. It's going to create and initialize the database and download Luckystrike.ps1 or the PowerShell script into the following directory. So I'll navigate into Luckystrike, and if I list out the files here, you can see we have Luckystrike.ps1. And I can execute it by, of course, just executing the script here, and I hit enter. And it looks like that's been blocked by the antivirus. So I'm pretty sure I disabled that. So let me just check again. All right. Yeah. So I've just disabled Windows Defender again. I forgot that whenever you restart Windows, it re-enables Windows Defender. Right. So again, just to execute the script, there we are. And you can see that it'll execute Luckystrike 4. It'll actually start up the framework, and you might get an error telling you that the module Invoke-Obfuscation is not installed, and that means that obfuscation options will not be available. So in order for you to actually to actually enable this module, you need to download the module and then save it within your PowerShell modules directory. So what you can do is just search for it. So again, if I just perform a quick search here, invoke, we can just call it Invoke-Obfuscation. That there should be a GitHub repository that contains the script, the PowerShell modules. This is the one here. So you can download this as a zip file, and I'm just going to save it. There we are. That's done. I'll open up my downloads folder, and let me just extract this here. And I want to just let me just cut this directory onto my desktop. So I'll also save that on my desktop, and I'll rename this to Invoke-Obfuscation. Right, and within this particular directory, we have the PowerShell scripts here. Right, so now we need to load the module within PowerShell. So what I'm going to do now is we'll just make sure we're currently in the correct directory here, and there we are. And we'll then navigate into the Invoke-Obfuscation directory there. And now, in order for you to actually install or import the module, you just simply need to type in import module. So import module, if you're familiar with PowerShell, import module, and then you specify the PowerShell script there. So Invoke-Obfuscation .ps1, we hit enter. That's going to import it for you. And now if we navigate back onto our desktop and we try and utilize Invoke-Obfuscation, or we try and launch it, let me try and type that without any execution there, just simply as the command. Let me just correct that. It should actually load up here. Right, so yeah, we actually need to load it manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this as administrator again, and we'll head over into our desktop. So users, IE user and desktop, and then we will invoke obfuscation there. And then again, we simply need to say import module, and we then specify the module that we want to import here. And again, I just want to make sure that that is done correctly. So import module, and then we specify invoke.psd1, and then we hit enter. And now we can test that again. So invoke obfuscation, and let's see whether that launches successfully. There we are. So if the invoke obfuscation module loads successfully like so, that means that it does work. So you can see that that is set up correctly. We're not going to use it, so I'm just going to say quit, and we're back on our desktop now. One more thing that you need to be aware of is if you want to utilize, or if you want it to work with Luckystrike. So, you know, if I head over into Luckystrike and sorry, let me just execute the script here. You can see it's still going to tell you module invoke obfuscation is not installed. The reason that is the case is because you've not added it to your PowerShell modules directory. So what you need to do is you first of all need to identify your environment variable for the PowerShell or your PowerShell modules, which is PS module path, and we hit enter. You can see it's under Documents, Windows PowerShell modules. So I'm going to copy this folder, and we're just going to copy the Documents, Windows PowerShell modules, and paste it in there. If the directory doesn't exist, if the Windows PowerShell directory doesn't exist, you can create it. If the modules directory doesn't exist, you can create it and just paste in the module there. Right, so now we can execute Luckystrike again, and you can see we don't get the Invoke-Obfuscation module error there. Okay, excellent. So now the next step here is to actually create our malicious Excel file. We'll utilize an Excel file. But before we do that, our method of, or our actual payload that we'll be utilizing will be, we'll use two payloads. We'll utilize a payload that's been made with MSF Venom, so a standard Meterpreter payload. And then we'll also set up a stager with Empire, and we'll actually take a look at how to use them in our documents. So again, before we do that, I just want to take you through how to utilize Luckystrike. So whenever you start up Luckystrike, you'll have 4 menu options. So payload options, catalog options, file options, and encode a PowerShell command. So the first thing you want to do is go into catalog options. You then want to add a payload to the catalog. So I hit enter. It's then going to ask you for a title. So I can specify a title like test. It's going to ask you for your target IP, target port, description, and then it's going to ask you what type of payload do you want to essentially utilize in your malicious document. So you can utilize a shell command, a PowerShell script, or an executable, and that's what we're going to be using in this video. So for example, if you specify an executable, you then need to specify the path to the payload that we will need to generate in a few seconds. And then once that is done, we should be able to use that payload and generate the malicious Excel document. So I'm just going to terminate Luckystrike here, and we're going to go back into the Kali VM, and we're going to generate both the MSF Venom payload and the Empire stager. So I'll see you there. All right, so I'm back on my Kali VM, and we're going to start off by generating the payload, our payload, Meterpreter payload with MSF Venom. So again, the reason why I'm utilizing both Empire and Metasploit is just to show you that you can utilize any that you're comfortable with. And again, it's going to be based on your type of attack, right? So to generate the payload, we're just going to generate a standard one. So MSF Venom, and the payload is going to be Windows. We don't know the architecture of the target system. So Windows Meterpreter reverse HTTPS. Let's use that. And of course, we're using a reverse connection primarily because we don't want to connect to the target. Rather, we want the target to connect to us. So we want it to be an egress connection from the target, right? So for the L host, we will set my Kali IP. So again, let me just get that right now. I should have actually got it. So I'll just type in my IP here. It is 192.168.2.21. So 192.168.2.21. And then you need to set up the L port. In my case, I'll just set it as 8080. And you, of course, you can customize that, and then you can also specify an encoder like Shikata Ganai if you want to get into encoding and evading antiviruses. But we'll be actually covering that in its own video because that topic can be quite complex. For now, we're just going to save or output the format as exe, and we'll just call it payload.exe. Right, and yeah, that's pretty much it. We hit enter. That's going to generate the payload for us, so we'll give that a few seconds to generate it there. And again, we'll just wait for this to complete. And then, of course, we can set up our multi-handler with Metasploit, and we can essentially listen for any connection. So there we are. It's created the payload for us. And we can then, as I said, utilize MSF console, and we can set up our listener. Alternatively, if you're really a red team fanatic, you also should be aware of a tool called Armitage, which doesn't come pre-packaged with Kali, but you can also utilize it, and I'll actually show you how to use it. So sudo apt-get install Armitage. It should be available as a package. There we are. So I'm just going to install that as well. It shouldn't take too much time, or it shouldn't be that large. There we are. I think we're pretty much good to go here. Hopefully that gets it installed. Let me search for it, Armitage. There we are. So we can also utilize Armitage for our listener. And in the spirit of red teaming, let's actually utilize Armitage. But I'll also run or utilize Metasploit, and we'll set up the multi-handler as well, just to show you that it does work. So I'll give this a few seconds to start up. We'll connect to the database. Yes, I want to start it manually, and there we are. So it should just take a few seconds to connect there. Okay. All right. So MS. That should work. I don't know why that's not working. In any case, I probably have to diagnose that, but we can essentially set up the listener here, and we'll use the multi-handler. And we'll set the payload as Windows interpreter reverse HTTPS. Show options, and set the L host to well, I've actually forgotten it again, my IP. Right, so that's 192.168.2.21, and then set the L port to 8080, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, so now that we've set that up, let's take a look at how to set up our stager, our Empire stager. And we'll navigate to Starkiller here. And the first thing we need to do is we need to set up our listener first. So we'll create our listener, and we'll use an HTTP listener here, and it'll bring up the options. And for the port, you can either use 1335 or 1336. I'll use 1335 there. You can also provide a bind IP, the default delay, default jitter options, and for the default profile in regards to the listener here, because it is utilizing the HTTP listener, we'll leave that as is. It's really very simple. So we'll create our listener there, and it's saying that is started. So we can click on listeners, and we can see we have our HTTP listener running on port 1335. We now need to create our stager, which is again our payload that will be executed on the target. But of course, we are going to use the payload with Luckystrike or in conjunction with Luckystrike to generate a malicious document. So we'll create a new stager, and you can see we have multiple stages with Empire. So if your target is OS X or is using a Mac, you can see there are various stages there. In our case, it's Windows, and we're going to generate a C#exe there. And we want to set the Starkiller name for this particular stager. You also need to specify the listener. In this case, it's going to be HTTP, which we just set up. The language should be C#. The .NET version will depend on the version of Windows you're targeting. So if it's Windows 7, some of the older service packs, you can go down to .NET 3.5. But because we're dealing with Windows 10, it's fair to say, or it's safe to say, that we can use .NET 4 or .NET version 4. You then can provide the output file name. I'll just call this empire.exe so that we can differentiate between the MSF Venom payload. There are also obfuscation techniques that you can use here, or the obfuscation commands that you can utilize. You can also, again, utilize proxies, but we'll get to advanced evasion techniques in its own video. Right now, we'll just create the stager. There we are. It's going to say connection refused. Looks like we have an error there. That might be an issue with the, let's see, what might be causing the issue there. Did we start the csharpserver? I think that's what's causing the issue here. Let's see whether that started. I'm just going to start it, and hopefully that starts it. So I'm just going to diagnose what the issue here is. All right, so I was able to diagnose the issue. It was the csharpserver. So the C# stager has been created, and I can now download it. So I can download it here, and I'm going to save it on my desktop under red team, where the MSF Venom payload is also saved. And now I'm just going to confirm that it's saved there, just to make sure that we have all the files ready to go. So red team, and we have the empire.exe and payload.exe, right? So now we need to transfer these two payloads into or onto our Windows VM, and we can then create our malicious documents. So we will create two documents, one with the MSF Venom payload, and the other one with the Empire payload. So when we launch both of these documents, we should get a reverse shell or a Meterpreter session on Metasploit, and we should get an agent connecting back to Starkiller or Empire here. So what I'll do is I will just create I'll just clear that up, and I will utilize the simple HTTP server module with Python. So I have a simple alias for that. It's called serve, and it's just going to serve these files so that I can transfer them over to the Windows VM. So I'm going to switch over to the Windows VM now. Before you do that, just make sure that you start or you run the actual multi-handler on Metasploit. The reason I'm saying that is because Starkiller and the way Empire works is that agents will ping back, and the port or the listener is already up and running. So we don't have to do that with Starkiller, but with Metasploit, just make sure you have that already running. All right, so I'm back on the Windows VM, and I'm currently accessing the web server that I served from my Kali VM. And I need to download both the Empire executable or the payload and the MSF Venom payload here. So I'm just going to save both of them. There we are. That's the first one and the second one. All right, cool. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to transfer them over to my desktop, because that'll be much easier to navigate to. And the next step, of course, will involve running PowerShell as administrator, and we now need to work with Luckystrike, right? So I'll head back over into the users directory under IE user, and I then specify the desktop and Luckystrike, and we can now execute Luckystrike. All right, so we are going to firstly generate the payload or the document, the malicious macro document for the MSF Venom payload. So the first thing again that I want to do is I want to click on catalog options, and I then want to add a payload to the catalog. So I'll hit 1. I provide it with a name. We'll call it Meterpreter reverse HTTPS, all right, so that it's easily identifiable. I'll not provide the target IP and any other information because I've already configured it. I've already configured the payload, and I'll not provide a description as well, although you can. It's quite helpful. Right now, for the payload type, I want to specify option 3, which is executable, and then I specify the path to the executable, which in this case you need to provide the absolute path. In my case, I've had issues when I've utilized case-sensitive paths, so I typically utilize a lower. I provide the path in lowercase, so users, and then IE user and desktop. And we're starting off, so the MSF Venom payload is payload.exe, right? And we hit enter, and it's going to say payload is added. And now what we need to do is we need to go back, so option 99, and we now need to select this payload. So we want to click on option 1, so select payload, and then again option 1 here, so select payload. And then we specify the document type you wish to make, which in this case is XLS, which is an Excel sheet. So we'll hit option 1. It's now going to ask you to specify your payload. In our case, the Meterpreter payload is first, so I'll hit option 1. It's now going to ask me to specify my infection method. So the infection method of choice that I'm going to be utilizing is certutil. Now you can find out more about this particular, if I can actually find it here, let's see, Luckystrike, it actually explains the infection methods. Let's see if I can find the documentation. There's quite good documentation here in regards to that. Let's see, where was that? That particular mention of it. Right, infection types. And we were talking about cert util. I'm not sure where it, there we are, infection type cert util. So based on the awesome work by, and the mention is here, this attack embeds a base64 encoded binary into cells, then saves it as a txt file to disk using cert util to decode the payload and save it as an exe. The exe is then fired. So that's how it works. You can also utilize other infection methods based on your particular use case. As I said, in my case, I'll use cert util. It's going to say payload added, and I then can go back, and I can now go back again, and we go to file options. So this is where we generate the malicious file. So I'll click on option 3, and I'll generate a new file. Now, the great thing is you can actually create or utilize an Excel sheet that you've set up, for social engineering purposes. So it could contain real data, real information that's pertinent to the person you're sending it to. For example, if your target was an accountant, you can use various templates you can find online and then generate from template, right? But in our case, we're just going to generate a new one. So here we hit option 1, give that a few seconds, and it's going to say success. The file is saved to C users, i.e. user desktop Luckystrike payloads, and this is the name of the XLS file here, right? So again, I'll just head over into my desktop and Luckystrike payloads, and this is the MSF Venom or the Meterpreter payload, or the Meterpreter malicious Excel sheet here, and of course it's in the form of macros. So now let's generate the Empire document. So I will go into the catalog options and I will add a payload to the catalog. I'll provide it with a name. I'll say Empire Stager. I'll not provide any other information here. For the payload type, that's going to be an executable as well. I'll hit option 3. Path to the executable is going to be again under users, i.e. user, and desktop, and the name of the payload or the stager is empire.exe. I hit enter. I now again need to go back and click on payload options. Select a payload because we need to make sure we are now working with the Empire stager. We specify option 2, cert util as the infection method, and that is pretty much it. So now I can go back to the file options, which is option 3. I can generate a new file, and that's going to generate it for us, and we now have our Empire malicious Excel sheet here, right? So they of course are named differently, and we can now execute them, and they should ping back on the Kali VM or on our C2 server, both on the Metasploit listener and the Empire listener as well. So what I'm going to do is we'll head over into payloads, and we will execute both of them. So I'll just run the Excel sheet, and I'll enable content that is going to execute the macro. So let's wait for that to execute completely, because until it executes the macro completely, there we are. So it looks like the macro is executed correctly. What we can do now is we can head back over into Kali and see what payload we actually executed first. All right, so it looks like the payload that we executed was the Meterpreter MSF Venom payload. So again, you can see we got a Meterpreter session. So I can say sysinfo, and let's see if we have got our initial access. There we are. You can see Windows 10, and yeah, the Meterpreter is a 32-bit session, but we can of course migrate our process. Right, so let's execute the other one. So I'm just going to head back over onto the Windows VM. All right, so I'm going to execute the Empire Excel sheet here, and again enable content so that it actually processes the macro code. So we'll give that a few seconds. All right, that looks like it executed successfully. So I'll now navigate back to my Kali VM. All right, so I'm back on my Kali VM and I'm currently on Starkiller. And if you click on agents, you can see we just got the Windows 10 agent a few seconds ago. And again, you can click on it with Starkiller, and you can firstly interact with the target. You can also execute modules, and these are Empire modules. We'll take a look at the Empire modules that we can utilize for persistence and credential dumping in the next set of videos. But for now, you can see we can also access the target's file system. So we'll give that a few seconds and we should be able to access the C drive. There we are. And I can open up the C drive here. And it should display the contents of the C drive. There we go. So I can access everything within the C drive. I can also view the tasks that I've just performed. So for example, I navigated to the C drive there. In terms of viewing, this is essentially the information, the system information here, or rather the agent information. But in terms of interaction, I can run a shell command. For example, I can run ipconfig. And I can just run that. So that is again going to run. And then if I click on tasks here, you can see it ran ipconfig. I can click on interact. So for example, let me just bring this here. You can see that this menu or this particular pane that was collapsed actually displays all the information pertaining to the shell commands that you're executing or the modules that you can execute. So you can see within the modules search bar here, you can search for a particular Empire module that you can utilize for, and of course they are sorted based on functionality. So for example, we have lateral movement modules. We also have persistent modules through various Windows services like WMI auto run, which should actually work if we did it right now. But we'll take a look at that when we get there. Right. So we can also again, utilize any of these. We can utilize any of these modules to extend or expand our functionality. And of course, you can run any command here, any shell command. So for example, let me see if I wanted to run another one like the system info command. That should display all or provide me with all the system information that I can then use again, for example, to identify any potential kernel exploits or exploits for particular Windows services. But you can see it's a Windows 10 Enterprise build 17763. We can also see that we have the memory and the hotfixes here, and that information is quite useful. Right, and again, if we take a look at the Meterpreter session here, as you already know, I've covered Meterpreter quite in depth. Of course, now the next step would be to establish some sort of persistence and also to start identifying or dumping credentials through the use of various tools, which is what we'll be exploring in the next video. Now, before I end this video, as I mentioned before, I can't cover the phishing aspect of this video. Ideally, what I would have liked to demonstrate was how to use a tool or a framework like GoPhish and essentially send the document to targets. And of course, I can't do that to anyone but myself. But this, you can actually check it out for yourself. This is a great framework. Many of you are familiar with it. It really is very, very, very simple to essentially set up an email campaign, a phishing campaign rather, and it doesn't have to be related to a malicious attachment. You can also set up a phishing campaign for a particular website and harvest credentials that way. And this is all part of the red team tactic that has to do with reconnaissance and initial access. So again, I would have loved to cover that. And before I end this video, I also wanted to cover a few other stages that can be quite useful for you for initial access. Now, in this case, I generated a C#exe that was a payload, or the stager rather, that I then used to create my malicious Excel sheet, my malicious macro Excel sheet. Now, if we take a look at a few others here, you can see it's not limited just to Windows. You also have You also have macros for various operating systems, OS X stages, Windows stages here. And in terms of Windows, the one that I wanted to highlight were the VBS, the XML, the batch, the batch stages, which again can be useful. You also have DLL stages, which can be used for DLL injection. And of course, that's an advanced privilege escalation technique. It's also an exploitation technique. I will try and cover it during the privilege escalation video. By the way, if you want to access the second part of this series, make sure to click the link in the description. It's absolutely free and you can catch up on the second part. But yeah, you also have the rubber ducky stager, which I believe I saw here. The rubber ducky stager again is used for exactly what it essentially says. There we are, Windows ducky. You can essentially use the output of this stager or this particular stager to create a rubber ducky that you can then perform USB dropping or USB drops, and with the hope that someone within the company or an organization plugs it into their system, and you then get your initial access that way. You might have also mentioned that I've not talked about encoding or obfuscation, and there's a good reason for that. And of course, you can actually see it here when creating a stager. So for example, if I create a C# stager again, there are options for obfuscation here. So for example, let me find the one that we had used here, C#. There we are. And you can see in terms of obfuscation and bypassing, you also have various other techniques that we will be exploring. Before I introduce them, there are a few other tactics and more specifically techniques that I need to highlight here. But what we've been able to accomplish so far in this video is we've set up our command and control center. And we've obtained initial access. The next logical step is to begin gathering credentials and setting up persistence, so that we have persistent access on our targets or on our agents, right? That being said, that is going to be it for this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.